recorder. I want to share with you a story, a kind of weird one from the Talmud, and this may actually be probably one of my shorter sermons ever. And it's the story of a homicide, and it's preserved, like I said, in the Talmud. So if you thought the Talmud was a place where it was only talking about fun laws, just wait. The rabbis had quite the imagination at times. There were two priests who, if you can imagine, were engaged in a competition to figure out who would perform a specific temple rite. And one of the priests stabs the fellow priest to death. And what the rabbis do, or what the people do afterwards, I think is equally shocking in its own way. Rabbi Tzodek stood at the steps of the hall and said, if someone slain is found lying in the open, the identity of the slayer not known, the elders and officials shall go ahead and determine the distance from the corpse to the nearby town. And in case you're curious what Rabbi Tzodek was citing, he was citing a rule that takes place in the book of Deuteronomy. And that if somebody is killed, the town closest to the body that's discovered is responsible. And that town who's responsible has to engage in the ritual of the red heifer, and they sacrifice a red heifer. But beyond just whether or not that's the issue, what Rabbi Tzodek was kind of getting at is he's in a way implying, is the courtyard responsible or the sanctuary responsible? He's trying to push that the temple's still sacred, even though a homicide had just taken place. The rabbis further push and say in this conversation amongst themselves that when blood is spilt, the Shekhinah disappears, and therefore the temple is defiled. But that's still not that overarching known piece of information, is understood, is still not quite accepted. What you kind of also start to see is the people around the priest, because those were near the temple, aren't even necessarily crying for the fact that one of them had just been murdered, but they're concerned about how to commit and engage in the ritual act of the red heifer. As if that shockingness doesn't stop, what happens next is that the father comes along of the priest who was slain, and he says, my son's still convulsing, therefore the knife is not defiled, indicating that what really concerned him was not the dead priest or wasn't the dead temple, it was the ritual object of the knife. And what we kind of see is that there's this, and if the response in Masechet Yoma that pushes, and the rabbis, you can kind of hear their frustration about the story. This teaches us that the impurity of the knife was a graver matter to the Israelites than the bloodshed. And if you're wondering, that is the sharpness of the tongue of the rabbis. So why am I bringing this story to light? Because I think this is one of those moments where we really fail sometimes to see what's important. For the priests who were functioning and working in the temple, getting and racing in on this bizarre race toward the top to be able to engage in a specific ritual was more important than anything else, making sure that the temple's still sacred, or that everything for the needs of the people is still being met. And I brought this up honestly because it reminded me also of something else. This week we read about the story of the cave of Machpelah in Hebron. This is one of the most sacred sites in Judaism. It dates back till some 37 or 3,800 years ago, when Abraham purchased a field right after Sarah dies. And why I'm bringing up this story about whether or not what's important and what's happening is that over the years, you got to kind of see what was important and what's not important, and the questioning, I think, of that continuing forward. For those people who can't remember where Hebron is, it's just here south of Jerusalem. And what this means is that we have, and this is, by the way, a picture of where Abraham supposedly was burying Sarah. And in case you're curious, all of the matriarchs and patriarchs are buried here. Archaeologically speaking, Hebron, we know, if you're an archaeological nerd, had continuous residence all the way from the Bronze Age. During the time of Herod, he built what you can see on top of the cave itself. And the cave has actually got two openings. Machpelah could be related, according to Rashi and others, to Kaful or double, because there was a double opening, and double the love. We know that at various points, Jews were allowed to be in there. Jews were prevented from being in there, depending on whether the area was controlled by the Mamluks, the Ottomans, and so forth. We also know that there's been continuous fighting. And I guess for me, the reason why I'm bringing this story up is that this is supposed to be a place that's holy for many people, for many reasons. Because Abraham is sacred for not just us, but also for Muslims. And when we're fighting, we are failing to see the humanity in each other. We're focused on the knife, and we're not focused on caring for one another. We're focused on the ritual, and we fail to focus again on compassion for ourselves and others. So I know that as we go forward this year, we're going to be tempted, I think, to get excited about contests and fights and focusing on many different things. But let's not forget an overarching value that we have: compassion for others, compassion for ourselves, that we're all created in the image of God, and to be a good, kind person to those around all of us. Shabbat Shalom.